Her sister stole her wedding day. Then the Alpha King arrived demanding his true bride. The candles in the grand hall had barely finished burning down when Elena Marsh realized her whole life had been rearranged without her permission. She stood behind a thick curtain at the edge of the reception hall, her hands shaking, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. Through a small gap in the fabric she could see her sister Camille standing at the altar, wearing the exact wedding dress that had been tailored for Elena's body, smiling at a man named Damian Cross as if she had always been the one meant to marry him. Elena had known something was wrong the moment she woke up that morning and found her mother already dressed, already calm, already avoiding her eyes. She had known when her father told her to wait in the small room upstairs where the guests arrived. She had known, deep down, long before anyone said a single word to her, that something had been stolen from her while she slept. But knowing it and watching it happen were two very different kinds of pain. The priest's voice rang out through the hall, asking if anyone objected to the union. Elena's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She thought about stepping out from behind the curtain. She thought about screaming that this was her wedding, her dress, her fiancé, her future. But her feet stayed rooted to the marble floor, and her voice stayed locked behind her teeth, because she had spent her whole life being told that she was the quiet one, the difficult one, the one who did not deserve to take up space in a room full of people who loved her sister more. So she said nothing. She simply watched as Camille lifted her veil and let Damian kiss her, sealing a marriage that was never supposed to belong to her. The applause that followed felt like it was crashing directly into Elena's skull. She turned away from the curtain and walked quickly toward the back exit of the hall, her low heels clicking too loudly against the floor. Nobody noticed her leaving. Nobody ever really noticed when Elena left the room. That had always been the case, for as long as she could remember. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold, carrying a strange electric feeling that made the fine hairs on Elena's arms stand up. She wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked toward the garden path behind the reception hall, needing distance from the music and the laughter and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She did not notice the way the wind had gone still around her. She did not notice that the crickets in the garden had stopped singing. She only noticed, a moment too late, that she was no longer alone. A presence moved through the darkness ahead of her, heavy and certain, like something that belonged to the night itself. Elena stopped walking. Her instinct screamed at her to turn back toward the lights of the hall, but her body refused to obey. She stood frozen at the edge of the garden, staring into the shadows between the trees, waiting for whatever was coming to reveal itself. When it did, her breath left her lungs completely. He was tall in a way that seemed almost impossible, broad-shouldered and dressed in dark clothing that looked far too fine for a garden path behind a wedding hall. His eyes caught the moonlight strangely, reflecting it back in a shade of grey that did not belong to any human she had ever seen. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately, as though he had been searching for her for a very long time and had finally found what he was looking for. Elena took a step backward. Her voice, when it finally came, sounded smaller than she wanted it to. "Who are you?" she asked. The man did not answer immediately. Instead, he stopped a few feet away from her and studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. There was something in his expression that looked almost like relief, mixed with a fierce and burning anger that had nothing to do with her at all. "You were not the one at the altar," he said finally. His voice was low, rough, carrying a weight that seemed to settle into her bones. Elena blinked, confused. "Excuse me," she said. "Inside that hall," he continued, nodding toward the lights glowing behind them, "there is a woman wearing a wedding dress. That dress was made for you. That marriage was arranged for you. And yet you are standing out here in the cold, while someone else takes your place." Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. "How could you possibly know that?" she whispered. "Because I have been searching for you since the day you were born," he said. "My name is Kale Draven. And you, Elena Marsh, are the woman I am bound to by something far older and far stronger than any wedding contract your family signed with the Cross family." Elena laughed, though there was no humor in the sound at all. It came out sharp and disbelieving, almost hysterical. "I think you have the wrong person," she said. "I am nobody important. My own family just replaced me at my own wedding without blinking." Whatever you are looking for, it is not me. Cale took a single step closer, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with something Alena could not name. You carry a mark, he said quietly. Beneath your collarbone. A shape like a crescent moon wrapped around a small star. Your grandmother knew what it meant. She made a promise long before you were old enough to understand what promises even were. Elena's hand rose instinctively to her collarbone, where a faint birthmark had rested since she was a child, one she had always covered with high collars and thick scarves because her mother had told her it looked strange, unnatural, something to be ashamed of. How do you know about that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. Because it belongs to me, Cale said. As you do. Before Alena could respond, the back doors of the reception hall burst open, and light spilled out into the garden, along with the sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps. Camille appeared at the top of the small stone staircase, still in her wedding dress, her face pale with something between fear and fury. Alena, she called out, her voice cracking. What is going on out here? Who is that? Cale turned his head slowly toward the sound of her voice, and something in his expression shifted from intensity to open contempt. He studied Camille for only a moment before his gaze returned to Alena, as though her sister was not even worth a second glance. That is the woman who stole your place today, he said simply. Camille's eyes went wide with fear and outrage. She hurried down the stairs, her wedding dress bunched in her fists, followed closely by Damian Cross and several confused guests who had noticed the commotion and followed her outside. What are you talking about? Camille demanded. This is my wedding. I do not know who you think you are, but you need to leave immediately. Cale did not so much as blink at her. I am not here for your wedding, he said, his voice carrying easily across the garden despite its quiet tone. I am here for the woman your family tried to erase. The guests who had gathered behind Camille began to murmur among themselves, confusion spreading through the small crowd like ripples across still water. Damian Cross stepped forward, his expression caught somewhere between anger and unease, though there was something else flickering behind his eyes too, something that looked almost like guilt. Sir, whoever you are, Damian said carefully, this is a private event. I must ask you to leave the property before I call for security. Cale's gaze flicked toward Damian for the briefest moment, and something about the look made the other man's confidence falter completely. You married the wrong woman, Cale said simply. And in doing so, your family has broken an agreement that was never yours to break in the first place. Alena stood frozen in place, watching the scene unfold as though she was somehow both inside it and completely separate from it at the same time. Camille turned toward her, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and fury that Alena had seen 1,000 times before, ever since they were children. What did you do? Camille hissed at her. What lies have you been telling this man? I have not said a single word to him about you, Alena replied, finding her voice at last, though it still trembled slightly. I do not even know who he is. Cale reached out then, not touching Alena, but extending his hand toward her in a gesture that felt somehow ceremonial, as if he was offering her something far more significant than a simple handshake. Come with me, he said. Away from this place, and away from these people who have never once seen your true worth. The guest gasped audibly at the suggestion, and Camille let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Alena is not going anywhere with a stranger who walked out of the dark, she said, forcing her voice into something like authority. This entire situation is absurd. But Alena was no longer looking at her sister. She was looking at the man in front of her, at the strange certainty in his eyes, at the way the entire world seemed to have quietly reorganized itself around his presence the moment he arrived. Something deep inside her, something she had spent her whole life ignoring and suppressing, was responding to him in a way she could not explain and did not fully understand. Why me? She asked quietly, her voice almost lost beneath the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Because you have always been the one, Cale answered. Not because of any contract, and not because of any promise made by people who are no longer here to keep it. Because something in you calls to something in me, and it always has, long before either of us understood what that meant. The crowd behind Camille shifted uneasily, whispers rising and falling like small waves. Damian Cross reached for Camille's hand, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously toward Cale as though some instinct deep inside him recognized a danger he could not name. Alena, Camille said again, her voice sharper now, edged with something close to desperation. Do not embarrass this family any further. Come back inside. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Alena did not move to obey. She stood perfectly still in the cold night air, staring at the hand Cale had extended toward her, feeling the weight of every year she had spent shrinking herself smaller and smaller so that Camille could take up more space in every room they had ever shared. She thought about the wedding dress that had been made for her body and worn by someone else. She thought about the years of being told she was too quiet, too strange, too difficult to love the way her sister was loved. She thought about the mark beneath her collarbone that she had hidden her entire life, ashamed of something she never understood. And then, slowly, deliberately, Alena reached out and placed her hand in Cale's. The moment their palms touched, something shifted in the air around them, a subtle but undeniable change that made every guest in the garden take an involuntary step backward. Warmth spread up Elena's arm and settled somewhere deep in her chest, a feeling of rightness so overwhelming that tears sprang unexpectedly to her eyes. Cale's fingers closed gently around hers, and for the first time that night, he smiled, though it was a small and quiet thing, meant only for her. Whatever comes next, he said softly, you will never again be the one standing in the shadows while someone else takes what belongs to you. Behind them, Camille's voice rose into a furious shout, demanding answers, demanding explanations, demanding that someone make sense of what was happening in front of dozens of stunned wedding guests. But her words seemed to fade into meaningless noise as Cale led Alena away from the garden, away from the hall, away from the life that had never truly belonged to her in the first place. Alena did not look back. For the first time in years, she found that she did not want to. The car that carried Alena away from the wedding hall was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It moved without any sound at all, gliding through the dark countryside roads as though the wheels never actually touched the ground. She sat beside Cale in silence for a long while, watching the trees blur past the window, trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. You are not going to tell me I imagined all of this, are you? She finally asked, breaking the heavy quiet between them. Cale glanced at her, and for the first time she noticed how carefully he seemed to be choosing his words, as though he understood that everything he said next would either steady her or shatter whatever fragile trust had begun to form between them. No, he said. Everything you saw tonight was real. And there is much more you still do not know. Alena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin her shawl was against the strange chill that seemed to follow Cale wherever he went. Then tell me, she said. All of it. I do not want half-truths or careful explanations meant to soften the impact. I want to understand what just happened to my life. Cale was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, though Alena had the distinct impression that he was seeing something far beyond the pavement in front of them. My people are not like yours, he began. We are older than most human kingdoms, hidden away in territories your world has forgotten how to see. We call our home the Nightshade Throne, and I am its ruling king. A king, Alena repeated slowly, testing the word as though it might dissolve if she said it too quickly. And what exactly does that make me? It makes you the one person in this entire world who is bound to me by something neither of us chose, Cale said. Many years ago, before either of us were born, an agreement was made between my family and yours. Your grandmother, a woman with more courage than most people ever have in their lifetime, understood things about the world that your parents chose to forget. Elena's mind flashed back to childhood memories of her grandmother, a quiet woman who used to trace the mark beneath Elena's collarbone with gentle fingers and whisper that it meant she was destined for something greater than the life her parents had planned for her. Alena had always assumed those words were simply the affectionate nonsense of an aging woman who loved her granddaughter deeply. She had never once imagined they might be literal. She always told me I was special, Alena murmured. I thought she just meant it the way grandmothers say things to make children feel better about being different. She meant every word literally, Cale said. Your bloodline carries a connection to my people that goes back generations. The mark on your skin is proof of that connection, a sign that you were always meant to stand beside the throne of the Nightshade Kingdom, whether your family wanted to admit that truth or not. Then why did nobody tell me? Alena asked, her voice rising with a mixture of frustration and hurt. Why did I spend my entire life being told I was strange, that my mark was something shameful to hide, when it was actually the most important thing about me? Because your parents were afraid, Cale answered simply. Your mother knew about the agreement her own mother made. She knew that one day someone would come to claim you, and she resented that inevitability more than she ever cared to admit. It was easier for her to raise Camille as the favored daughter and push you toward invisibility than to face the reality that you were never truly hers to control. Alena felt something inside her chest crack open at those words, a wound she had carried quietly for years finally being named out loud by someone else. She had always sensed her mother's coldness toward her, always felt the subtle distance that existed between them even during moments that should have felt warm and close. She had simply never understood why. The car slowed as it approached a set of enormous iron gates set into a high stone wall that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, disappearing into thick forest on either side. Beyond the gates, Alena could see the silhouette of an enormous structure rising against the night sky, all sharp towers and ancient stonework that looked like it belonged to a different century entirely. Is that where we are going? Alena asked quietly. That is where you belong now, Cale said. Welcome to the Nightshade Throne. The gate swung open without any visible mechanism, and the silent car rolled forward onto a long stone driveway lined with tall dark trees. Alena pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, watching the castle grow larger and larger as they approached, feeling a strange mixture of fear and wonder settle into her stomach. When the car finally stopped in front of the massive entrance, Cale stepped out first and moved around to open Elena's door, extending his hand to help her out in a gesture that felt almost formal, almost ceremonial. She took his hand hesitantly, still unused to the warmth that spread through her whenever their skin touched. Standing before the entrance to the castle was a small group of people, all dressed in dark, elegant clothing, watching Alena with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open suspicion. At the front of the group stood an older woman with silver hair pulled back into a severe knot, her sharp eyes studying Alena from head to toe with an intensity that made Alena want to shrink back into the shadows. This is her, the older woman said, though it was not quite a question. This is Alena Marsh, Cale confirmed, his voice carrying a note of authority that Alena had not heard from him before. She is the one the prophecy spoke of. She is my true mate. Murmurs rippled through the small crowd gathered at the entrance. Alena felt her cheeks flush under the weight of so many unfamiliar eyes studying her so openly, as though she was some kind of curiosity being examined rather than a person standing in front of them. The silver-haired woman stepped forward, her expression softening only slightly. My name is Ophelia, she said. I have served this family for many years, long before Cale was even born. Forgive us for staring. We have waited a very long time for this moment, and none of us expected it to happen quite this way. What way did you expect it to happen? Alena asked, finding her voice despite her nerves. Ophelia's lips curved into something close to a smile. We expected you to arrive as a bride already claimed, she admitted. Not rescued from the wedding of another man entirely. Alena felt heat rush to her face again, though this time it was closer to embarrassment than fear. It is a long story, she said quietly. One that we have all night to hear, Ophelia replied, gesturing toward the enormous doors of the castle. Come inside. You must be exhausted, and there is much we need to discuss before morning. Alena followed Cale and Ophelia through the entrance, her eyes wide as she took in the interior of the castle, all soaring ceilings and ancient tapestries depicting scenes she did not recognize, wolves and moons and figures locked in battle against shadowy creatures she could not identify. Everything about the place felt impossibly old and impossibly grand, nothing like the modest house she had grown up in with her parents and her sister. They led her to a large sitting room where a fire crackled in an enormous stone fireplace, casting warm light across the dark wooden furniture arranged throughout the space. Cale gestured for Alena to sit, and she lowered herself onto a plush chair near the fire, grateful for its warmth after the chill of the night air outside. I imagine you have many questions, Cale said, taking a seat across from her. More than I know how to ask, Alena admitted. But I suppose the most important one is this. What happens now? What exactly am I supposed to become in this place? Cale leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes catching the firelight in a way that made them seem almost luminous. You are supposed to become exactly who you already are, he said. Nothing more, and nothing less. This kingdom does not need you to transform into someone else. It needs you to be Alena Marsh, fully and completely, without apology. Alena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly, unwilling to appear weak in front of strangers who were watching her so closely. "Nobody has ever said that to me before," she said quietly. "My entire life, everyone has wanted me to be smaller, quieter, less noticeable. Never simply myself." "Then those people did not deserve to know you," Ophelia said firmly from where she stood near the fireplace. "And they certainly did not deserve to keep you hidden away while your sister took everything that should have belonged to you." The mention of Camille sent a fresh wave of unease through Elena's chest. "What happens to her now?" Alena asked. "What happens to my family, after tonight?" Kale's expression grew serious. "That depends on what they choose to do next," he said. "Your family broke an agreement that was made in good faith many years ago. There will be consequences for that choice, though what form those consequences take remains to be decided." "Will they be hurt?" Alena asked immediately, an instinctive protectiveness rising in her despite everything her family had done to her. Kale studied her for a long moment before answering. "That is not for me to decide alone," he said carefully. "But I promise you this. Whatever happens next, you will have a voice in it. You will never again be forced to stand silently while decisions about your own life are made without you." Alena nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. Outside the tall windows of the sitting room, she could see the first faint hints of dawn beginning to color the horizon, the long night finally drawing toward its close. She thought about Camille standing at the altar in her stolen dress, about her parents avoiding her eyes all morning, about the years of feeling invisible in her own family. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Alena allowed herself to imagine a future that did not involve shrinking herself down to fit into spaces too small for who she truly was. "Tell me more about this kingdom," she said finally, looking directly at Kale. "Tell me about the people I am supposed to lead beside you, and the history that connects my family to yours. If I am going to become part of this world, I want to understand every piece of it, starting tonight." Kale's expression shifted into something that looked almost like pride, and he began to speak, his voice steady and low, weaving together stories of ancient pacts, hidden bloodlines, and a kingdom that had waited generations for a queen who was finally, truly, ready to claim her place among them. Weeks passed inside the nightshade throne, and Alena found herself slowly learning the rhythms of a world she had never known existed. Every morning, Ophelia arrived at her chamber with lessons about the kingdom's history, its customs, and the delicate politics that held together the various pacts scattered across the hidden territories. Alena absorbed everything with a hunger that surprised even herself, as though some part of her had always been waiting to learn exactly these things. Kale remained a constant presence throughout those weeks, though he was careful never to push her faster than she was ready to go. He walked with her through the castle gardens in the evenings, answering her endless questions about shifting, about the ancient bond between mates, about the responsibilities that would eventually fall onto her shoulders as his queen. Alena found herself looking forward to those quiet evening walks more than she wanted to admit, drawn to the steady warmth of his presence in a way that still confused her sometimes. "You are staring again," Kale said one evening, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as they walked along a stone path lined with tall white flowers that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. Alena felt heat rush to her cheeks, quickly looking away toward the flowers instead. "I am simply trying to understand everything," she said, though her excuse sounded weak even to her own ears. Kale chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. "You do not need an excuse to look at me, Alena," he said. "I am certainly not opposed to it." Alena rolled her eyes, though she could not fully suppress her own smile. "Do not let that confidence grow too large," she teased. "I have known you for less than a month." "And yet," Kale said, growing more serious, "I have known you my entire life, even before I ever met you. The bond between true mates does not follow the same timeline as ordinary relationships. What I feel for you has been growing since long before either of us understood what it meant." Elena's smile faded slightly, replaced by something quieter and more thoughtful. "I still do not fully understand what that means," she admitted. "This bond you speak of. What does it actually feel like, from your side of things?" Kale stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "It feels like finally being able to breathe after holding your breath for years without realizing it," he said quietly. It feels like a piece of myself that was always missing has finally been returned to where it belongs. Elena's heart pounded loudly in her chest at his words, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply standing together beneath the moonlight, the space between them charged with something neither was quite ready to name aloud. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching along the garden path. A young guard appeared, slightly out of breath, his expression tense with urgency. "Forgive the interruption, my king," he said quickly. "There is someone at the front gates requesting entry. She claims to be a peace envoy from the Ashbourne territory, sent to discuss relations between our packs. But she also claims a personal connection to the future queen." Elena's stomach dropped immediately. "A personal connection," she repeated slowly. "Did she give a name?" The guard nodded. "She calls herself Camille Marsh," he said. Elena felt the color drain from her face. Cale's expression darkened immediately, his jaw tightening as he processed the information. "Bring her to the main hall," he said finally, his voice carrying an edge of controlled tension. "But keep guards stationed at every exit. I do not trust the timing of this visit, especially given her supposed connection to the Ashbourne." Elena walked beside Cale toward the main hall, her mind racing with questions and old wounds she had thought she was slowly beginning to heal from. She had not seen Camille since the night of the wedding, had not spoken to her family at all in the weeks since Cale had brought her to the Nightshade throne. Part of her had almost convinced herself that chapter of her life was finally closed. The main hall was already filled with several members of the court by the time Elena and Cale arrived, all standing at careful distances, watching the entrance with wary expressions. When the heavy doors finally opened, Camille walked through them, dressed in simple traveling clothes, looking nothing like the triumphant bride Elena remembered from the wedding. "Elena," Camille said immediately, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine relief. "I am so glad you are alive. I feared the worst when you disappeared that night." "I am fine," Elena said carefully, keeping her voice neutral despite the storm of emotions churning inside her. "What are you doing here, Camille? And what is this about representing the Ashbourne?" Camille's eyes flickered briefly toward Cale before returning to Elena. "After everything that happened," she said, "my marriage to Damien fell apart almost immediately. His family blamed our family for the humiliation of that night. They ended the arrangement, and with it, every financial promise that came with it. Our parents are drowning in debts they can no longer pay." Elena felt a small pang of something that was not quite sympathy, but was not entirely absent of it either. "I am sorry to hear that," she said carefully. "But that still does not explain why you are standing in front of the Nightshade throne claiming to represent a rival pack." Camille's expression shifted, something calculating flickering behind her eyes before she quickly masked it with an expression of vulnerability. "The Ashbourne territory reached out to our family shortly after the wedding fell apart," she explained. "They offered to help settle our debts if I agreed to act as a messenger for them, delivering a proposal of peace to the Nightshade throne. I did not know it would bring me back to you, Elena. I swear I did not know." Cale studied Camille closely, his expression unreadable. "What exactly is this proposal of peace?" he asked evenly. Camille reached into the small bag she carried and withdrew a sealed letter, extending it toward Cale with a slightly trembling hand. "They wish to discuss a treaty," she said. "An end to the tension between your territories. They ask that I deliver this personally, given my connection to Elena." Cale did not immediately take the letter. Instead, he glanced toward one of his advisors standing nearby, a tall man with sharp eyes who stepped forward and took the letter from Camille instead, opening it carefully and scanning its contents before nodding once toward Cale. "It appears legitimate," the advisor said quietly, though there was clear suspicion still lingering in his voice. "Though the timing remains curious." Elena studied her sister carefully, searching her familiar face for any sign of the deception that had once come so easily to her. "Why would the Ashbourne choose you specifically to deliver this message?" Elena asked. "Out of everyone they could have sent, why you?" Camille's composure flickered for just a moment before she recovered it. "I suppose they knew my connection to you would make it more difficult for the Nightshade throne to refuse the meeting," she said carefully. "It was simply strategy on their part, nothing more." Elena did not entirely believe her, though she could not pinpoint exactly why. There was something in the careful way Camille chose her words, something in the way her eyes kept flickering toward the exits of the hall, that made Elena's instincts prickle with unease. Cale, apparently sensing the same uncertainty, addressed Camille directly. "You will remain here as our guest while we consider this proposal," he said. "Under careful watch, given the unusual circumstances of your arrival." Camille's eyes widened slightly. "That seems unnecessary," she said quickly. "I have delivered the message. Surely I am free to return home now." "Not until we have verified the authenticity of this proposal directly with the Ashbourne leadership," Cale said firmly. "You will be given comfortable quarters, but you will not be permitted to leave the grounds unaccompanied." Camille's jaw tightened, though she quickly softened her expression into something more pleading. "Alena," she said, turning toward her sister. "Surely you can convince him to let me go. I have done nothing wrong here. I am only trying to help our family survive." Alena studied her sister for a long moment, memories of years spent in her shadow rising unbidden to the surface of her mind. She thought about the wedding dress, about the years of feeling invisible, about the countless small cruelties that had shaped so much of her childhood. And yet, some part of her still remembered the sister who used to braid her hair when they were small children, before jealousy and favoritism had carved such a deep divide between them. "I cannot make that decision for him," Alena said finally. "But I will make sure you are treated fairly while you are here, Camille. That much, I can promise you." Camille's expression flickered with something that looked almost like disappointment, though she quickly masked it with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Alena," she said softly. "That means more to me than you know." As guards led Camille away to her assigned quarters, Alena remained standing beside Cale in the now quieter hall, her mind still turning over the strange interaction that had just taken place. "You do not trust her," Cale observed quietly, once Camille was safely out of earshot. Alena shook her head slowly. "I want to trust her," she admitted. "She is still my sister, despite everything." But something about her explanation felt incomplete. She was too careful with her words, too quick to redirect every question I asked. Cale nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "My advisors will investigate the authenticity of this proposal," he said. "In the meantime, we will keep a close watch on your sister's movements within the castle. If there is deception here, we will uncover it before it can cause any real harm." Alena felt a small measure of relief at his words, though the uneasy feeling in her stomach did not entirely disappear. As the days passed, Alena found herself watching Camille carefully whenever their paths crossed within the castle, noting the way her sister's eyes lingered on certain hallways longer than necessary, the way she seemed to be quietly mapping the layout of the fortress rather than simply waiting patiently for the treaty negotiations to conclude. One evening, nearly a week after Camille's arrival, Alena found herself unable to sleep, her mind restless with unresolved questions. She rose from her bed and wandered quietly through the darkened halls of the castle, seeking the comfort of the garden where she had spent so many peaceful evenings with Cale. As she approached the garden entrance, she heard voices carrying softly on the night air, hushed and urgent. Alena paused in the shadow of a stone archway, straining to identify the source of the conversation. One voice belonged unmistakably to Camille. The other belonged to someone Alena did not recognize at all, low and unfamiliar, carrying an accent she had never heard before. "The plan must be executed before the full moon gathering," the unfamiliar voice said quietly. "Once the pack elders confirm her position as queen, it will become impossible to remove her without triggering open conflict between the territories." "I understand the timeline," Camille's voice replied, tight with barely concealed tension. "But getting close enough to her without raising suspicion has proven far more difficult than we anticipated. She has hardly left the king's side since I arrived." Elena's blood ran cold as she pressed herself further into the shadows, listening with growing horror as the conversation continued. "Find a way," the unfamiliar voice insisted. "The Ashbourne leadership grows impatient. Your family's debts will not simply disappear on their own, Camille. You agreed to deliver more than a simple message when you accepted our help." "I know what I agreed to," Camille snapped back, though her voice trembled slightly beneath the sharpness. "Give me more time. I will find a way to get her alone." Elena's heart pounded so loudly in her chest that she feared it might give away her hiding place. She backed away slowly from the archway, careful to keep her footsteps silent against the stone floor, her mind racing with the terrible implications of what she had just overheard. Her sister had not come to the Nightshade throne as an innocent messenger caught in unfortunate circumstances. She had come as a willing participant in a scheme designed to harm Alena, working alongside a rival pack that clearly wished to see the Nightshade throne thrown into chaos. Alena hurried back through the darkened halls, her thoughts spinning wildly as she tried to decide what to do next. She needed to find Kel immediately, needed to warn him before Camille's plan, whatever it truly was, could be set into motion. The sister she had once hoped might still care for her, despite everything that had happened between them, had revealed herself to be something far more dangerous than Alena had ever allowed herself to imagine. Alena found Kel in his private study, still awake despite the late hour, poring over documents spread across his wide wooden desk. He looked up the moment she entered, his expression shifting immediately from concentration to concern when he noticed the paleness of her face. "What happened?" he asked, rising quickly from his chair. Alena closed the door behind her, her hand still trembling slightly from what she had overheard. "Camille is not here as an innocent messenger," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I just overheard her speaking with someone from the Ashbourne territory. They are planning something against me, something meant to happen before the full moon gathering." Kel's expression darkened instantly, all traces of warmth disappearing into something colder and far more dangerous. "Tell me exactly what you heard," he said, his voice low and controlled. Alena recounted the conversation as precisely as she could remember it, watching Kel's jaw tighten with every word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance as he processed the information. "They intend to remove you before the elders can formally confirm your position as queen," he said finally. "Once that confirmation happens, any attempt to harm you would be seen as a direct act of aggression against the entire Nightshade throne, something the Ashbourne are clearly not yet prepared to risk openly. So they need to act before then," Alena said quietly, the full weight of the danger settling over her. Kel nodded grimly. "And your sister has apparently agreed to help them accomplish that, in exchange for having your family's debts forgiven," he said, though there was something in his tone that sounded almost more disappointed than surprised. Alena sank into a chair near the desk, her mind still reeling. "I do not understand how she could agree to something like this," she said softly. "Whatever resentment she carries toward me, I never imagined it ran deep enough for her to conspire in something that could genuinely hurt me." Kel crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands gently in his. "Jealousy left unchecked for long enough can grow into something far darker than anyone intends," he said quietly. "That does not excuse what she has done. But it may explain how she convinced herself it was justified." Alena looked into his eyes, searching for some measure of comfort amid the chaos swelling inside her. "What happens now?" she asked. "Do we confront her immediately?" Kel considered the question carefully before answering. "If we confront her too soon, we risk alerting the Ashbourne that their plan has been discovered before we fully understand its scope," he said. "It would be wiser to allow her to believe her secret remains safe for now, while we quietly strengthen security around you and gather more information about exactly what the Ashbourne intend." Alena nodded slowly, though the idea of continuing to interact with Camille as though nothing had changed filled her with a heavy dread. "I do not know if I can pretend everything is fine when I know what she is planning," she admitted. "You will not be alone in this," Kel promised. "I will ensure you are protected at every moment, whether you can see that protection or not. And we will find the right moment to end this threat before it can ever reach you." Over the following days, Alena forced herself to maintain a careful mask of normalcy whenever her path crossed with Camille's, though the effort of pretending grew more exhausting with each passing interaction. She noticed now, with clearer eyes, the subtle signs she had somehow missed before, the way Camille's gaze would linger too long on the castle's exits, the way she seemed to disappear for stretches of time that she could never quite account for when questioned casually about her whereabouts. Kel, meanwhile, worked quietly behind the scenes, coordinating with his most trusted advisors to uncover the full scope of the Ashbourne's intentions. Guards were stationed more discreetly but more thoroughly throughout the castle, and Alena was never truly left without someone watching over her, even during moments that appeared, on the surface, to be entirely private. 4 days before the scheduled full moon gathering, everything came to a sudden and violent head. Alena had been walking alone through a quiet corridor near the castle's eastern wing, having convinced Kale reluctantly that she needed a few moments of solitude to clear her mind after days of constant tension. She had barely turned a corner when a hand shot out from a darkened doorway, gripping her arm tightly and pulling her backward into a small, unused chamber. Elena's scream was muffled almost immediately by a firm hand pressed over her mouth. She struggled against the grip, her heart pounding wildly, until her eyes adjusted to the dim light and she recognized the face staring back at her with cold, calculating eyes. "Camille. Do not scream," Camille whispered urgently, though there was no comfort in her tone, only tension and barely restrained panic. "I need you to listen to me carefully." Elena's mind raced, torn between fear and fury as she processed the fact that her own sister had just physically dragged her into a hidden room. When Camille finally released her grip, Alena stumbled backward, putting as much distance between them as the small chamber allowed. "I know what you are planning," Alena said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "I heard you in the garden, talking with someone from the Ashbourne about removing me before the full moon gathering." Camille's face went pale, though she did not attempt to deny it. "Then you understand why I need you to listen to me now," she said quickly. "This has gone further than I ever intended it to. They are not simply planning to remove you from your position, Alena. They intend to eliminate you entirely, in a way that will look like an unfortunate accident." Alena felt the blood drain from her face at the blunt admission. "And you agreed to help them with this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I agreed to deliver a message and gather information," Camille said, her composure finally cracking under the weight of everything she had been carrying. "I did not fully understand what they truly intended until it was already too late to simply walk away. They threatened our parents, Alena. They threatened to make sure our family lost everything, including the roof over their heads, if I did not cooperate fully." "Why are you telling me this now?" Alena demanded, her mind still spinning with the implications of what she had just heard. "Because I cannot go through with it," Camille said, tears beginning to fill her eyes. "Whatever exists between us, whatever damage I have caused throughout our lives together, I am not capable of standing by while they actually hurt you. I came here tonight to warn you, not to harm you." Alena studied her sister carefully, searching for any sign of the manipulation that had once come so easily to her. But what she saw instead was genuine fear, genuine regret, etched clearly across Camille's familiar features. "Then help me stop this properly," Alena said firmly. "Come with me to Kale right now. Tell him everything you just told me, and we will find a way to protect our parents from the Ashbourne's threats while ending this danger once and for all." Camille hesitated, fear flickering visibly across her expression. "If they discover I have betrayed them," she said quietly, "they will retaliate against our family immediately." "Kale will not allow that to happen," Alena said, with more certainty than she perhaps fully felt, though she believed it deeply nonetheless. "But you have to trust me, Camille. Hiding this any longer will only make things worse for everyone involved." After a long, tense moment, Camille finally nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her trembling hand. "All right," she said softly. "Take me to him." Together, the two sisters made their way through the castle corridors, Elena's heart still pounding with the weight of everything that had just unfolded. When they finally reached Kale's study, he rose immediately upon seeing them together, his expression shifting quickly to alertness at the visible distress on both their faces. "What happened?" he asked, his eyes moving quickly between Alena and Camille. Alena stepped forward first. "Camille has something important to tell you," she said. "Something that could change everything about what we thought we understood regarding the Ashbourne's plans." Camille took a deep, shaking breath before recounting everything to Kale, her voice trembling as she confessed the full scope of the threats made against her family, the true intentions of the Ashbourne leadership, and her own desperate decision to finally break away from their scheme rather than allow harm to come to her sister. Kale listened silently, his expression darkening with every detail, though he did not interrupt until Camille finished speaking entirely. "You understand the severity of what you have just confessed," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "Conspiring against the future queen of this territory is not something that can simply be forgiven without consequence." "I understand that fully," Camille said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for the chance to help stop what I helped set into motion," and for protection for my parents against the Ashbourne's retaliation. Cale studied her for a long, silent moment before finally nodding slowly. Your cooperation will be considered carefully when the time comes to determine appropriate consequences, he said. But first, we need every piece of information you possess regarding the Ashbourne's plans and their timeline for acting against Alena. Over the following hours, Camille provided detailed information about the Ashbourne's intentions, revealing that they planned to stage an incident during the full moon gathering itself, using the chaos of the large ceremonial event to create an opportunity that would appear accidental to outside observers. With Camille's information in hand, Cale's advisors began working immediately to develop countermeasures that would protect Alena while also exposing the Ashbourne's true intentions to the wider community of Parks who would be gathering for the ceremony. Alena remained close beside Cale throughout the tense planning that followed, grateful despite everything for her sister's final decision to break away from the scheme that had threatened to tear apart everything Alena had only recently begun to build. Whatever damage existed between them, whatever years of resentment and favoritism had shaped their difficult relationship, Camille's choice to finally stand beside her rather than against her offered a small, fragile hope that perhaps their fractured bond was not entirely beyond repair. As the full moon gathering drew closer, Alena found herself facing the coming danger with a strength she had never quite recognized in herself before, no longer the invisible daughter hiding in her sister's shadow, but a woman finally ready to stand fully in her own power, prepared to protect the life and the kingdom she had only just begun to claim as truly hers. The night of the full moon gathering arrived with a clear sky and a bitter chill in the air, the enormous silver moon hanging low over the ceremonial grounds where Parks from across the hidden territories had gathered to witness the formal confirmation of Elena's position as the future queen of the Nightshade throne. Torches lined the perimeter of the grounds, casting flickering golden light across hundreds of faces watching the proceedings with a mixture of curiosity and quiet judgment. Alena stood at the center of the gathering, dressed in a flowing dark gown that Ophelia had helped her prepare earlier that evening, her hair woven with small silver ornaments that caught the moonlight in delicate patterns. Despite the beauty of the moment, her heart pounded with tension, knowing that somewhere within the crowd, the Ashbourne envoys were waiting for the opportunity to strike. Cale stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring, though Alena could sense the same cold tension in him that she felt within herself. The elders of the Nightshade throne had gathered on a raised platform nearby, prepared to perform the ceremony that would formally recognize Elena's place within the kingdom's ancient traditions. "Remain close to me, no matter what happens," Cale murmured quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd with careful vigilance. "Our guards are positioned throughout the grounds, but we cannot predict exactly how they intend to make their move." Alena nodded, forcing her breathing to remain steady despite the anxiety twisting through her stomach. Camille, standing nearby under careful watch, caught Elena's eye briefly and offered a small, tense nod of encouragement, the closest thing to solidarity the two sisters had managed to rebuild in the short time since Camille's confession. The eldest of the Nightshade elders, a tall woman with deep lines etched across her weathered face, stepped forward to address the crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the silent grounds. "Tonight, we gather beneath the full moon to witness the joining of two bloodlines long promised to one another," she announced. Alena Marsh, step forward. Alena walked forward slowly, her heart pounding loudly enough that she felt certain everyone around her must be able to hear it. She stopped in front of the elder, who studied her carefully before continuing the ceremony. "Do you accept the responsibilities that come with standing beside the throne of the Nightshade Kingdom?" the elder asked. "To protect this territory and its people, above your own comfort and safety, for as long as you shall live." "I do," Alena said, her voice steady despite the fear coiled tightly within her chest. The elder nodded solemnly and turned toward Cale, preparing to continue the ceremonial words that would formally bind Elena's position within the kingdom. But before she could speak another word, a sudden commotion erupted near the edge of the gathering, shouts rising sharply into the quiet night air. Alena spun around just in time to see a group of unfamiliar figures emerging from the shadows at the perimeter of the grounds, moving with swift, coordinated purpose toward the ceremonial platform. Cale's guards reacted instantly, moving to intercept the intruders before they could close the distance, but the chaos of the sudden confrontation sent the gathered crowd into a wave of startled movement and confusion. "Get her to safety," Cale shouted to the nearby guards, his own body already shifting protectively in front of Alena as the conflict grew closer. Alena felt strong hands grip her arms, pulling her backward away from the platform as the guards worked to hold back the advancing Ashbourne envoys. She struggled against the grip instinctively, unwilling to simply flee while chaos erupted around the people she had come to care for so deeply in such a short time. Through the confusion, she caught sight of Camille moving swiftly toward one of the ashborn figures, her expression fierce and determined despite the danger surrounding her. Camille intercepted the figure just before he could reach the platform, grappling with him briefly until additional guards arrived to subdue him completely. The confrontation lasted only a few tense, chaotic minutes before Chaos forces successfully overwhelmed the ashborn intruders, securing each of them under heavy guard as the crowd slowly began to settle from the shock of the sudden attack. Alena, finally released from the guard's protective grip, hurried back toward the platform where Chaos stood, breathing heavily but entirely unharmed. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, her hands moving instinctively to check for any sign of injury. "I am fine," Chaos assured her, though his eyes were scanning the crowd carefully, ensuring no additional threats remained hidden among the gathered onlookers. "Are you hurt?" Alena shook her head, relief flooding through her system as the immediate danger passed. She turned quickly toward Camille, who stood nearby, breathing hard but similarly unharmed, having played a crucial role in preventing the attackers from reaching the platform entirely. "Thank you," Alena said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked at her sister properly for the first time in longer than she could remember. "You could have simply stayed back and let the guards handle everything. Instead, you put yourself directly in harm's way to protect me." Camille's eyes filled with tears as she looked back at Alena. "I owed you that much, at the very least," she said quietly. "After everything I have done, I could not stand by and watch them hurt you while I did nothing to stop it." The elder who had been conducting the ceremony stepped forward once again, addressing the shaken but increasingly calming crowd with a steady, authoritative voice. "The threat has been contained," she announced. "Those responsible for this attempted attack will face appropriate justice according to the laws of this kingdom. But tonight's ceremony will continue, as planned, because the future of this throne will not be dictated by those who seek to destroy it through cowardice and deception." The crowd murmured in agreement, and slowly, the atmosphere of tension began to shift back toward the solemn reverence the ceremony had originally called for. Alena returned to her position in front of the elder, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation, though her resolve remained entirely unshaken. The elder resumed the ceremony, completing the ancient words that formally bound Elena's position within the kingdom, declaring her officially recognized as the future queen of the Nightshade throne, bonded permanently to Kael through both ancient bloodline and true mate connection. As the final words were spoken, a soft, warm light seemed to ripple through the crowd, an ancient magic recognizing and sealing the completion of a promise made generations before either Alena or Kael had been born. When the ceremony finally concluded, the crowd erupted into genuine celebration, the earlier fear and chaos giving way to relief and joy as the gathered Pax welcomed their new future queen with open acceptance. Alena felt Kael's hand find hers, squeezing gently, his eyes filled with a warmth and pride that made her chest ache with an emotion she was only beginning to fully understand. In the days that followed the gathering, the captured Ashborn envoys revealed the full extent of their leadership's involvement in the plot against Alena, providing Kael's advisors with enough evidence to bring formal accusations against the rival territory's ruling council. Negotiations began shortly afterward, resulting in a treaty that stripped the Ashborn leadership of much of their previous influence while ensuring lasting peace between the territories for the coming years. As for Camille, her cooperation in exposing the plot, along with her decisive actions during the attack itself, weighed heavily in her favor when the Nightshade elders convened to determine appropriate consequences for her initial involvement in the scheme. Rather than facing severe punishment, Camille was permitted to return home under the condition that she maintain no further contact with the Ashborn territory, her family's debts quietly settled by the Nightshade throne as a gesture of goodwill toward Elena's continued healing with her sister. Before Camille departed the castle to return to their parents, she sought out Alena one final time, finding her seated quietly in the garden where so much of Elena's own transformation had taken place over the preceding weeks. "I do not expect you to forgive me for everything," Camille said quietly, settling onto the bench beside her sister. "Not for the wedding, and certainly not for what I nearly allowed to happen to you here. But I wanted you to know that I am genuinely sorry, in a way I have never truly allowed myself to express before." Alena studied her sister's face carefully, searching for any remaining trace of the manipulation and jealousy that had defined so much of their shared history. What she found instead was quiet, genuine remorse, along with the first real glimmer of the sister she remembered from their earliest childhood, before resentment had grown so deeply between them. "I do not know if we can simply return to how things were before," Alena said honestly. "Too much has happened between us for that to be realistic. But I am willing to try building something new, if you are willing to do the same." Camille nodded, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "I would like that very much," she said softly. The two sisters sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the moonlight filter gently through the garden's tall white flowers, before Camille finally rose to begin her journey home, carrying with her the fragile beginnings of a relationship that Alena hoped might one day grow into something healthier than what they had known before. In the months that followed, Alena settled fully into her role as Queen of the Nightshade Throne, growing more confident with each passing day in her ability to lead alongside Cale, her voice carrying weight and respect among a court that had once regarded her with curious uncertainty. The invisible daughter who had once stood silently behind wedding curtains, watching her own life stolen away without protest, had become a woman entirely transformed, standing boldly at the center of a kingdom that finally, truly saw her. Cale watched her one evening as she addressed a gathering of pack leaders with calm, steady authority, resolving a dispute between two territories with a wisdom and fairness that left even the most skeptical among them nodding in quiet approval. When the meeting concluded and the hall emptied, Cale approached her, his expression filled with the same warmth and admiration that had never once wavered since the night he found her standing alone in that garden. "You have become exactly what this kingdom always needed," he said softly, taking her hands gently in his own. Alena smiled, leaning into him with a comfort and certainty that felt entirely natural now, nothing like the confusion and fear that had once defined her earliest days within these walls. "I could not have become this person without you," she said quietly. "Without this place finally giving me the space to become who I was always meant to be." Cale pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his voice carrying quiet certainty as he spoke his final words that evening. "Then let us build the rest of this life together," he said. "Exactly as we were always meant to." Outside the tall windows of the castle, the full moon rose steadily into the night sky, casting its silver light across a kingdom finally at peace, watching over a queen who had once believed herself unworthy of being seen, now standing fully and completely in the light she had always deserved.